Nurse Cooper's outdated triage documentation represents exactly the kind of protocol deviation that costs this hospital its accreditation. That is what Dr. Whitfield said 47 minutes before he lost everything. The fluorescent lights of St. Michael's in Portland hum over Ashley Cooper as she moves through morning rounds, her hand steady despite the tremor most nurses develop after 20 years of graveyard shifts and code blues. The hospital corridor smells like antiseptic and the faint copper undertone of old blood no amount of bleach can fully erase. Her badge hangs from a blue lanyard, the plastic worn at the edges from 18 years of being clipped and unclipped 1,000 times a day. She checks vitals on Commander Hayes in Trauma 3, the Navy SEAL officer airlifted from Ramadi 3 days ago with shrapnel embedded in his left shoulder and a concussion that makes him sleep through morphine drips. The same commander who leads her son's platoon overseas. That detail lives in a separate compartment of her mind, the one she sealed shut the moment his helicopter touched down at St. Michael's. She can't afford to think about Marcus stationed in Anbar province while she stands over his commanding officer's bed. Her fingers brush the tarnished challenge coin in her scrub pocket, metal worn smooth from years of handling. The coin is the size of a silver dollar, stamped with a trident and a date nobody at this hospital would recognize as significant, 2009. Ramadi. The year that defines everything that came after, even though nobody here knows it. Ashley reads Hayes's vitals with the precision of someone trained to keep people alive in conditions that would break most civilians. Blood pressure 118/74. Heart rate 68, steady. Oxygen saturation 97% on room air. No fever. No sign of sepsis. The shrapnel wound is healing cleaner than expected, which means the Navy medic who got him stabilized in the field knew what he was doing. She's seen worse in operating theaters that weren't theaters at all, in places that don't appear on any official map. She makes a note on his chart, vital stable. Patient sleeping without agitation. Continue current antibiotic regimen. Monitor for fluid accumulation around pericardium. The last notation is almost invisible in her handwriting, buried between routine observations. Most nurses wouldn't flag it. Most nurses aren't trained to catch cardiac tamponade in its early stages, before the patient codes. Most nurses haven't been certified as field medics for a unit that operates outside normal military command structure. That's when Dr. Whitfield arrives, trailing for resident physicians and 2 attending doctors like a general inspecting troops. His white coat is crisp, unblemished, the fabric of someone who hasn't actually touched a patient in 4 years. He walks with the kind of deliberate slowness that signals his preparing to perform, to create a moment that his audience of junior physicians will remember and, more importantly, repeat. Power looks like wasted time when you have subordinates to prove it to. Ashley is standing at the medication cart, preparing her next round, when Whitfield's voice cuts through the hallway like a blade finding its mark. Nurse Cooper, your triage documentation on Mr. Jackson in Trauma 1 from yesterday evening. He pauses. The residents lean in. Ashley doesn't turn around. She continues preparing the 10 mg dose of lisinopril for Hayes's blood pressure protocol. Represents exactly the kind of protocol deviation that costs this hospital its accreditation. She closes her eyes for one breath. Just one. Then she opens them and continues. Your classification of his injury as stable moderate when the attending physician determined it required level 1 intervention shows either incompetence or a deliberate disregard for hospital procedure. Whitfield's voice rises slightly, the way voices do when they're being performed for an audience. This is not community college first aid. This is a trauma center. We maintain standards. The residents exchange glances. One of them shifts his weight. They're young enough to still believe that humiliation is how authority is maintained, that public degradation creates excellence. They're wrong, but Whitfield has built his reputation on this lie long enough that nobody questions it anymore. Ashley turns from the medication cart with the 4 bag in her left hand. She moves past Whitfield without breaking stride, without meeting his eyes, without the slightest tremor in her voice when she speaks. I'll review the protocol, Dr. Whitfield. That's all. 4 words. No apology, no defensiveness. Just acknowledgement that she heard him and will continue her shift. She walks to Hayes's room, hangs the 4 bag, adjusts the flow rate to 5 milliliters per hour, and checks the peripheral line for infiltration. Her hands move the way hands move when they've done the same task under conditions that would make most people hesitate. Under fire. Under pressure. Under the kind of circumstances where hesitation means someone doesn't go home. Whitfield follows her into Hayes's room, still talking, still performing for the residents who cluster in the doorway like students at a teaching hospital where the lessons are cruelty dressed up as standards. I'm documenting this in your file, Nurse Cooper. One more deviation and we'll be having a conversation with human resources about whether your continued employment serves the hospital's interests. Ashley doesn't look at him. She checks Hayes's for sight again, though she checked it 15 seconds ago. The commander's eyes flutter slightly in his sleep, but he doesn't wake. The morphine drip is doing its job. Understood, she says. Her voice is absolutely level, the way a lake is level before a storm. Calm surface. Everything else underneath. Whitfield leaves. The residents follow like pilot fish behind a predator. Within 30 seconds, the only sound is the ventilator's steady rhythm in the room next door and the soft beep of Hayes's heart monitor, steady as a metronome, 68 beats per minute, each one proving he's still alive and, by extension, still her responsibility. Ashley finishes her med pass through all 14 rooms on her rotation, moving from patient to patient with the efficiency of someone who has done this 1,000 times. The work matters more than the words. The work has always mattered more than the words. A 73-year-old man with acute kidney injury receives his fluid restriction instructions. A 41-year-old woman post-mastectomy gets her pain medication and the gentle redirection of her anxiety. A young boy with appendicitis waits quietly for surgery, and Ashley sits with him for 3 minutes, the only human contact some patients get all day that isn't transactional. By 5 p.m., her shift is over. The night nurse arrives, a competent RN named Marcus who actually got the name right. Her son, thousands of miles away, has that name too. She briefs him on her patients, paying particular attention to Commander Hayes. His vitals have been stable all day, she says. But I want you to watch for any sign of fluid accumulation around the heart. He took shrapnel. Sometimes complications develop slowly. If his breathing changes, if he complains of chest pressure, if his neck veins start to distend, call the attending immediately. Don't wait for rounds. Marcus nods. He's experienced enough to know this is serious information, even if it's wrapped in standard-sounding language. Will do, he says. You okay? You look tired. Ashley is already pulling off her badge. I'm fine. She's been told she looks tired for about 16 years. The first 8 years it was true. Now it's just her face. The parking lot is cool with the kind of Portland drizzle that feels less like rain and more like the sky giving up, one molecule of water at a time. Ashley sits in her car for 2 minutes before starting it, resting her hands on the steering wheel. The small scars on her knuckles are barely visible in the darkness, but she can feel them. They're the way you feel something that was broken once and healed wrong. At home, in her apartment on Belmont Street, she sits at the kitchen table with the lights off. Just her and the tarnished challenge coin, spinning it across her palm again and again, watching the trident flash in the darkness from the streetlight outside her window. The coin is heavy for its size, dense with the weight of things nobody here will ever know about. Ramadi. 2009, a compound in the Jolan district. 3 men who didn't make it home because of a mistake Ashley caught 5 minutes too late, back when she was someone with a different name and a different uniform. She's not that person anymore. Or maybe she is, and everyone at St. Michael's is just seeing the version of her that fits into their world. The tired nurse. The quiet one who doesn't speak up. The woman who accepts public humiliation with her jaw clenched and her breathing steady and her hands moving on to the next task. Her phone sits on the table. No messages. That's how it works now. No one has her real number anymore except Naval Intelligence and the Pentagon's duty officer. Her son texts her about school and homework, and she responds with a mother's love filtered through the careful language of someone who can't tell him the truth about anything that matters. She spins the coin again. Trident. Side. Trident. Side. The metal is worn smooth because her hands have done this 10,000 times in 10 years, every time she sits alone, every time the weight of what she carries becomes too heavy to hold alone. What she doesn't know, what nobody at St. Michael's knows, is that Naval Intelligence's concern about Commander Hayes isn't just about his recovery. It's about why he was really in Ramadi when his convoy was hit. It's about the intelligence he was carrying. It's about the fact that someone in a position of power wanted him dead bad enough to ensure he'd be in that Humvee at that exact moment. And it's about the fact that Ashley Cooper, Master Chief Petty Officer, retired from active duty and currently working as a hospital nurse under her civilian name, is the only person the Navy trusts to keep him alive until they figure out who that someone is. At 1,130 hours, the vending machine hummed its mechanical song on the third floor, and Ashley Cooper inserted $2 bills with the precision of someone who'd operated in worse conditions than a hospital corridor. The protein bar dropped. She reached for it. Behind her, at the nurse's station exactly 10 feet away, 2 interns leaned against the counter like they owned the place. One of them lowered his voice into something mockingly high-pitched, almost musical in its cruelty. "Did you use the Cooper method for that chart?" His companion snorted. "You know, the method where you just forget everything important." They laughed. The sound carried down the hallway the way bad news always does, traveling faster than good. Ashley heard every word. She unwrapped the protein bar slowly. Her fingers didn't shake. Her breathing didn't change. She bit into it. Vanilla and almonds and the metallic taste of controlled anger. Dr. Whitfield stood at the attending's desk, tablet in hand, face angled downward with the kind of intensity that suggested he wasn't actually reading anything. His mouth curved. A smile that looked like a shark recognizing blood in the water. Just a hint of it. Just enough that the interns would know he'd approved. That he'd orchestrated it. Ashley chewed. Swallowed. Turned and walked back toward the medication room, her badge swinging against her ribs like a metronome keeping time to a war they didn't know they were fighting. At 1,400 hours, Whitfield appeared in the medication room where the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects, and the smell of antiseptic hung so thick it coated the back of her throat. Ashley was drawing up Hayes's antibiotic infusion, ceftriaxone, 2 grams for, timing it to coordinate with his physical therapy window. Her hands moved with the fluid precision of muscle memory honed across 18 years in operating theaters and field hospitals and places that didn't have names on maps. Whitfield leaned against the door frame. He had the posture of someone who'd never been told no, never been made to wait, never experienced the particular education that comes from watching someone die in your arms because you were 2 seconds too slow. "Security reminded me this morning that we have a 3-strike policy on documentation errors, Nurse Cooper." His voice carried the tone of someone reading from a script he'd written himself, performing it for an audience that only he could see. "You're at 2. He let that hang there. Let it float in the air like a threat materializing. 1 more means an escort off hospital property. Permanently. He waited. She knew he was waiting. This was the moment where a normal person would flinch. Would apologize. Would promise to be better. Would show fear. Ashley measured the dosage into the syringe with her left hand while her right held the vial steady. 1.8 cubic centimeters, perfect. She capped it. Labeled it in her precise block letters, Hayes, Commander. Antibiotic 4. Time, 14:07. Acknowledged, Doctor, she said flatly, not turning around. He wanted capitulation. He wanted her to understand that he held her employment in the palm of his hand like a small animal he could crush whenever he felt like it. Instead, she moved past him toward Hayes's room, not brushing against him, not acknowledging him further, not giving him the reaction that would have made this worth his effort. His breathing changed. Shallowed. She heard it as she walked past. Anger does that to men like Whitfield, makes them predictable, makes them loud in their silence. Hayes's room was quiet except for the ventilator's rhythmic wheeze, in and out like something alive and separate from the commander himself. She inserted the 4 line into the port, watched the antibiotic begin its slow climb up the tubing, watched it enter his bloodstream. His vitals remained steady. Oxygen saturation 97. Heart rate 68. Blood pressure holding. She documented everything with extreme care, every number, every time stamp, every observation noted in language so precise it could stand up to scrutiny from the Navy, from the Pentagon, from the entire intelligence apparatus of the United States government if it came down to it. Which it might. Because Whitfield was watching now. Personally. That's what he'd said. One more error and she was gone. And if she was gone, Hayes lost his only protection inside these walls. The person who knew what he was actually here for. The person who understood that the threat wasn't coming from outside the hospital. It was already inside. Already embedded in the staff roster like a sleeper agent waiting for the right moment to wake up. That night, alone in her apartment on Northeast 23rd Avenue, Ashley sat at the kitchen table at 2,155 hours and pulled the tarnished challenge coin from her pocket. It was the size of a quarter, made from aircraft aluminum recovered from a Black Hawk that went down in Kandahar in 2004. 17 operators died in that crash. She'd carried 4 of the bodies out herself. The coin was the only piece of wreckage the recovery team let her keep. She turned it over and over in her fingers, the metal worn smooth from years of operations, from deployments that made her current role seem impossibly small and impossibly critical at the same time. Outside, rain began hammering the windows like something trying to get in. She was still sitting there when Marcus found her at 2,200 hours. Her 12-year-old son appeared in the doorway wearing his JROTC t-shirt, the one with the faded emblem on the chest, and he looked at her with the kind of clarity that only children possess, the ability to see exactly what's broken without needing anyone to explain it. "Mom, why are you home? You're supposed to work nights this week." She pocketed the coin quickly. The motion was smooth, practiced, designed to communicate that nothing was wrong. That this was normal. That 12-year-old shouldn't ever have to worry about their mothers. "Shift change, baby. Go finish your homework." He lingered in the doorway for 7 full seconds. She counted them. In combat, 7 seconds is the time it takes for a situation to shift from manageable to catastrophic. It's long enough for a sniper to reset. Long enough for an IED to detonate. Long enough for everything to change. "Commander Hayes, he's doing okay, right? You said he was stable." The question landed differently than Marcus intended. He didn't know why his question was dangerous. He didn't know that his mother had been placed at St. Michael's Hospital specifically to protect the man he was asking about. That naval intelligence suspected someone inside the hospital wanted Hayes dead. That the entire reason she'd come back from active duty, left the teams, and taken a civilian job pushing medications and documenting vital signs was because the Navy had asked her to do something she couldn't refuse. He's stable, she confirmed, not meeting her son's eyes. That's what matters. Marcus nodded like that made sense, like he believed her, and then he turned and walked back toward his room, leaving her alone with the rain and the weight of lies that were supposed to protect him but mostly just made him look at her with confusion in his eyes. After he went to bed, she opened her encrypted laptop. The message from her handler was waiting in the secure channel that routed through 3 proxy servers and 2 military installations. Infiltration threat confirmed. Suspect hospital staff. Maintain cover. Hayes cannot be moved until stable for transport. Estimated 72 hours. She closed the laptop. 72 hours. 3 days. That was how long she had to identify which staff member was compromised, shut down the threat, and keep Commander Hayes alive while maintaining a cover that was disintegrating like wet paper under Whitfield's sustained pressure. The 3-strike documentation policy meant she had maybe 2 days before Whitfield manufactured a reason to remove her from the hospital entirely. She'd seen him do it before, the way institutional power works in people like him, the way a single phone call to a board member, a single fabricated complaint to administration, a single weaponized policy could destroy a career in exactly the time it takes to file paperwork. She returned to St. Michael's at 0600 the next morning, arriving before shift change to check Hayes's chart in the quiet of the early ward. The access log showed that someone had entered his room at 03:42 during the night shift. The credentials listed were from the ward clerk, but the timestamp was wrong, a full 7 minutes off from standard protocol, and the access pattern was inconsistent with normal workflow. No vital sign checks. No medication administration. Just entry and exit. She photographed the access log with her encrypted phone and sent it to her handler with a single-line message, possible breach. Investigating. At 0730, Whitfield appeared for rounds and immediately noticed that she'd modified Hayes's monitoring schedule. Instead of hourly checks, she'd increased it to every 30 minutes. His cardiac rhythm had shown some irregularities during the night, nothing critical, nothing that would alarm most clinicians, but enough that someone trained in combat medicine, someone who'd spent years learning to read the body's whispered warnings before they became screams, would want to watch more carefully. Nurse Cooper, who authorized this monitoring change? His voice was sharp. Surgical. Designed to cut. She met his eyes directly. Clinical judgment, doctor. Patient presented with some arrhythmia patterns overnight. Wanted to establish a baseline before morning assessment. Your clinical judgment has been noted as deficient. He physically removed her notation from the order sheet, literally took the paper from her hands and crossed out her handwriting. Return to standard protocol. Now. But that wasn't the worst part. That was the moment his phone rang. At 08:07 on Thursday morning, Dr. Whitfield sat in his office with the door closed and a list of names spread across his mahogany desk like a hand of cards. 9 board members. 12 years of favors. He'd built his reputation on knowing exactly which threads to pull, and Patricia Chen's thread was frayed and waiting. He dialed her office. She answered on the second ring. Patricia. James Whitfield. I need 5 minutes of your time regarding a patient safety issue at St. Michael's. There was silence. He could hear her calculating. Her son's DUI arrest had never made the news because Whitfield had called a judge. That favor lived between them now, a debt that breathed. What patient safety issue? She said carefully. A nurse. Competent appearing, but she's been making independent clinical decisions that deviate significantly from protocol. This morning she nearly compromised the care of a critical military patient we're treating, Commander Hayes, the SEAL officer. If this pattern continues, I'm concerned about liability. More than that, I'm concerned about accreditation. One major incident under her watch and the hospital faces review board scrutiny. Have you documented this? Patricia asked. I'm building the documentation now. But I wanted the board chair to understand the scope before we move forward. I'd hate for this to become a regulatory issue that catches St. Michael's off guard. His voice was smoke. Reasonable. Professional. A man concerned only about patient safety and institutional integrity. I'm requesting that we assemble an external review team. Immediately. Before this escalates. He could hear her breathing. I'll make some calls, Patricia said finally. Thank you, Patricia. I knew I could count on you. He hung up and made the next call. And the next. By 09:23, he'd contacted 6 board members. Each conversation was a mirror of the last, a gentle reminder of past favors, a careful framing of Ashley Cooper as a liability, a quiet suggestion that swift action protected everyone. None of them said no. None of them said yes. They simply said they would look into it, which meant the machinery was already turning. At 09:45, Whitfield called the nursing supervisor, Rebecca Okafor, who had been working at St. Michael's for 18 years and had never once questioned a doctor's authority. Rebecca, I need to raise a concern about one of your nurses. Ashley Cooper. This morning during rounds, she made what I can only describe as an independent clinical decision regarding Commander Hayes's care protocol. It wasn't dangerous, but it was outside her scope. I'm concerned this might be part of a pattern. What kind of decision? Rebecca asked. A documentation deviation. Nothing critical in this case, but if she's comfortable deviating once, she'll do it again. I'd like to request a formal performance review. And I'd like you to observe her work directly for the remainder of her shifts this week. Call it a standard competency check. Just to make sure we're aligned on protocol. Rebecca had worked with Whitfield for 6 years. He'd never asked for anything unreasonable. He was respected. He was careful. And the way he'd framed this, not as an accusation but as due diligence, made it sound not just reasonable but necessary. I can do that, Rebecca said. When should I start? This afternoon. Her shift is until 1900. If you could shadow her, I'd feel much better. By 10:30, Whitfield had pulled Ashley's personnel file from the hospital records office. He spent 90 minutes going through every performance review, every chart notation, every incident report from the past 24 months. He was looking for ammunition, and he was patient. He found it in the margins, a medication timestamp that was 17 minutes different from the documented time, a vital sign notation that wasn't in the standard format, a care plan that deviated from the template. None of it was egregious. All of it was documentable. He photographed each page on his phone. At 11:45, Rebecca Okafor found Ashley at the nurse's station, updating Commander Hayes' chart with the 1100 vitals. Ashley, I need to talk to you for a moment. Ashley looked up. Rebecca's expression was neutral, but there was something different in her posture, the formal distance of authority conducting an inspection rather than a colleague offering guidance. Of course, Ashley said. Dr. Whitfield has asked me to observe your clinical work for the remainder of this week. It's a standard competency check. Nothing to be concerned about. Just a routine review. The words landed like a stone dropped in still water. Ashley's hands didn't pause. Her breathing didn't change. She simply nodded once and returned her attention to the chart. I'll be around, Rebecca said. If you need anything, just let me know. She didn't leave. She positioned herself near the medication cart and watched. Ashley had been watched before. She'd been watched by insurgents with rifles. She'd been watched by interrogators with clipboards. She'd been watched by people who wanted her dead, and she'd learned long ago that the watching itself was a weapon meant to create hesitation. She would not hesitate. She pulled up the next patient's chart, Mrs. Patterson in 407, post-op day 2, and began her assessment. Every movement was textbook perfect. Every documentation was precisely formatted. She was aware of Rebecca's presence the way a chess player is aware of an opponent across the board, as information to be processed and used. But what neither woman was watching was Commander Hayes' monitor, which had begun showing subtle changes in its electrical pattern. The ST segments were creeping upward. The intervals were tightening. No single change was alarming. Together, they told a story that only someone trained to read battlefield medicine would recognize. Fluid was building around his heart. At 14:47, Ashley was drawing up medications for her 3 o'clock med pass when she glanced at the monitor bank and her entire body went cold. The pattern was accelerating. She had seen this before in Ramadi, in the aftermath of an IED blast, in a young Marine whose internal bleeding didn't show on scans but whose monitor never lied. That Marine had deteriorated from alert to unresponsive in 41 minutes. If pericardial effusion was developing, Hayes had perhaps 6 hours before decompensation. Maybe 8 if she was generous. She moved toward his room. Rebecca followed. I need to increase his monitoring parameters, Ashley said quietly. His rhythm is changing. Have you notified Dr. Whitfield? Not yet. I wanted to. Then I'd wait for his authorization before making any protocol changes. Ashley's jaw tightened, but only for a fraction of a second, a hairline fracture in her composure that only someone trained in interrogation would have noticed. She returned to the nurse's station and paged Whitfield. 317 for Dr. Whitfield, code priority. The overhead system repeated her request. The hospital breathed around her, fluorescent lights humming their plastic frequency, for pumps beeping their mechanical rhythm, distant phones ringing in adjacent units. She waited. No response. She paged again at 15:02. At 1517. At 1533. Each time the page went into the void and nothing came back. At 16:08, Ashley called the on-call attending, Dr. Marcus Chen, Patricia's nephew, who had taken over the trauma service at 1600. Dr. Chen, this is Ashley Cooper in ICU. I'm concerned about Commander Hayes' cardiac rhythm. I'd like to add continuous cardiac telemetry and possibly get a repeat echo. Did you run this by Dr. Whitfield? Chen asked. I've paged him 5 times. No response. Then you'll need to wait for him to respond before making protocol changes. Those are his standing orders. The phone went dead. Ashley stood in the medication room, aware of Rebecca standing outside the doorway, aware of the challenge coin in her pocket, the one she'd carried through 3 deployments, through Ramadi's streets, through every operation that demanded she become someone else entirely. The coin had weight. The coin had history. The coin was the only piece of her that had never changed its form or function. She had been placed at St. Michael's to protect Commander Hayes from an infiltration threat, a suspected Iranian intelligence operative who'd been embedded in the Portland Refugee Services network and had made contact with the hospital 6 weeks ago. The operation was classified. The timeline was 72 hours. If she was reassigned or discredited before she completed the threat assessment, the entire mission failed. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Commander Hayes was dying, and the man orchestrating his slow removal from critical care was hiding behind protocol and procedure and the accumulated leverage of favors owed. At 17:42, Hayes's monitor alarmed. His BP had dropped from 118/76 to 94/60 seconds. His heart rate was climbing toward 106. The breathing pattern was shifting, shallower, more rapid. The fluorescent lights above his bed seemed to buzz louder, as if the hospital itself was holding its breath. Rebecca stood beside him, updating the chart, still watching Ashley. Ashley moved to his bedside with the fluid precision of someone who'd performed field procedures in worse circumstances than a hospital ICU, with a supervisor watching her every motion. She placed her hand on Hayes's chest, feeling the subtle change in his breathing pattern, the way his lungs were working harder against pressure building inside. I'm calling for an echocardiogram, Ashley said. It wasn't a request. You need Dr. Whitfield's authorization, Rebecca said. Dr. Whitfield is not responding to pages. Commander Hayes is decompensating. An echocardiogram takes 20 minutes. We don't have 20 minutes. Then I'll contact Dr. Chen An. Rebecca. Ashley's voice had changed. It had dropped an octave. It carried the weight of someone who'd given orders to Marines under fire, who'd made decisions that meant life or death, who was no longer asking permission. Get the ultrasound machine. Now. Rebecca stared at her. Now. It wasn't a request. It was a command, and somewhere in her training and her instincts, Rebecca heard the difference. She moved. The ultrasound technician, Derek, wheeled the machine into Hayes's room at 17:58. His hands moved with the muscle memory of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. The probe found Hayes's heart in seconds. The image came back grayscale and terrible, fluid surrounding the cardiac sac, nearly an inch of it pooling against the right atrium. Early tamponade. Not critical yet. But minutes away from critical. Hours away from arrest. I'm calling Dr. Whitfield, Rebecca said, reaching for her phone. But Ashley was already moving, already calling out as she moved past her toward the supply closet. Get a 14-gauge angiocath. Normal saline. Pressure bag. And get me a crash cart staged outside the room. You can't do that without. I can. I am. Do it. The code in her voice was something Rebecca had never heard before, not aggression, not panic, but absolute certainty. The certainty of someone who'd operated in conditions that would destroy most people. Rebecca moved. True heroism is what you do when the world stops watching. At 01:47, the heart monitor alarm screamed. Blood pressure 82/45 and dropping. Ashley was in Commander Hayes' room before the code button stopped echoing through the corridor, her hand already on his wrist, pulse thread thin, the kind of pulse that meant minutes, not hours. She read the monitor with the clarity that comes from 14 years of field medicine in places where your next decision meant someone lived or died in your arms. The fluid around his heart was compressing it, squeezing the chambers, stealing every drop of output his body needed. Cardiac tamponade. She'd seen it twice in Ramadi. Both times the patient coded in a Humvee 5 minutes later. At 02:03, his heart rate spiked to 142. The pressure kept dropping. Ashley moved toward the crash cart with the fluid precision of a woman who'd performed this procedure in a makeshift aid station with nothing but a field kit and the will to keep someone breathing. The overnight resident, a third-year named Patterson, appeared in the doorway, still buttoning his coat. "We need to wait for the attending," he said. His voice trembled. The way young doctors trembled when they had protocols but no instincts, education but no ghosts. Ashley didn't look at him. She was already prepping the tray, hand steady as surgical steel, laying out the pericardiocentesis kit like she'd done it 1,000 times because she had, just not in any hospital that kept records. The needle. The syringe. The betadine swab. Everything her body remembered from Ramadi, even if her credentials couldn't prove it. "He'll be dead in 4 minutes, Ashley said. Patterson's face went white. Another nurse appeared in the doorway, Sarah, one of the ICU travelers who'd been eating at the vending machine when Whitfield had called. She stared at the procedure tray, then at Ashley's hands, then back at the tray. "You can't do that. That's not your scope." Ashley identified the insertion point below Hayes' xiphoid process, that small bone at the base of the sternum, the anatomical window into a man's chest when time was the only thing you didn't have. She angled the needle 45 degrees toward his left shoulder, the same angle she'd used in 2019 when a Marine had taken shrapnel and the flight surgeon was 12 minutes out. She advanced slowly. Watched the monitor. Her thumb moved with the needle, a gentle, controlled, feeling for the give of the pericardial sac, that moment when the needle breaks through the fibrous tissue and enters the space where blood was pooling like a slow-motion vice around the heart. Patterson hadn't moved. His body was locked in that paralysis that happens when someone's training tells them one thing and their eyes are telling them another. The monitor showed her everything. Her hands moved on their own. Muscle memory from a life she couldn't talk about. The needle entered. She aspirated. 120 cubic centimeters of blood-tinged fluid. The color of rust and relief. The pressure gauge on the syringe climbed as she withdrew it. Pressure that had been strangling Hayes' heart was now flowing into a plastic barrel in her hands. The monitor beeped. The numbers changed. The numbers that meant alive instead of dead. Hayes' pressure improved immediately. 95/52. Then 108/65. The diastolic numbers rising like a man surfacing from deep water. His heart rate dropped to 98. The erratic rhythm smoothed into something almost normal, something that looked like a future. Sarah was staring at Ashley like she'd just watched someone speak in a language that didn't exist. Patterson had his hand over his mouth. Ashley calmly disposed of the pericardiocentesis needle in the Sharps container, her movements efficient and unremarkable, like she was just another nurse finishing a routine task. The fluid would be sent to pathology. The chart would be written. The story would begin. The code team arrived 90 seconds later to find Hayes conscious, stable, and breathing on his own, with Ashley reviewing the monitor strips alongside him like this was something that happened every night, like she wasn't standing in the middle of a secret that was about to detonate. The attending physician, a man named Richardson who'd been asleep in the call room, examined Hayes methodically. Listened to his chest. Checked the monitor. Looked at the needle entry site on Hayes' sternum, already clean and bandaged. He turned to Ashley with an expression she couldn't read, the kind of expression doctors get when they know something happened in their hospital that wasn't supposed to be possible. "Who authorized this procedure?" "No one," Ashley said. There wasn't time. By 0700, when Whitfield arrived for morning rounds and learned that Commander Hayes was stable in the ICU with a documented critical save and a clear paper trail, the shift in the hospital became visible. Ashley could feel it in the way the nurses moved around her, not hostile anymore, but uncertain, the way people act when they've seen something they can't explain. But Whitfield's face was the real tell. The rage in it was absolute. He went directly to the nurse supervisor's office and had Ashley pulled from the unit before rounds even started. She sat across from Linda Mendez, the supervisor, who wouldn't meet her eyes, and heard the words that had been inevitable since the moment she'd made the decision to save Hayes' life. You performed a surgical procedure outside your scope of practice. Dr. Whitfield is recommending immediate termination and board investigation. Ashley nodded once. She'd known this was coming. She'd made the choice anyway. By 0900, Whitfield was on the phone with board members he'd cultivated over 15 years of strategic donations and committee work. By 1100, he'd contacted the Portland Medical Board requesting an external review of her credentials, her training, her entire history. By 1300, he'd filed formal complaints with her nursing school, her previous employers, the Red Cross, anyone and everyone who had her name in a file. The narrative was already written: reckless cowboy medicine. Undertrained nurse playing doctor. A safety liability. We need to know exactly who trained Nurse Cooper and why she thinks she has the authority to perform cardiothoracic procedures, Whitfield told the investigative team he'd personally requested, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a man who'd finally found the leverage to do what he'd wanted to do since day one. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the person who'd trained Ashley Cooper was the United States Navy. That she'd performed emergency procedures in places that didn't appear on maps. That every document he was about to request would hit classified walls and red-flagged server access restrictions that would shut him down faster than he could dial. But she couldn't tell him that. Because blowing her cover meant mission failure. Because the whole reason she was at St. Michael's in the first place was to keep Commander Hayes alive, and protecting him meant staying silent while her reputation burned. She made it home by 1400, her badge still in her pocket. They hadn't asked for it back yet, hadn't processed the suspension formally, everything still in that grey space where it could somehow be unmade. Her phone was showing 17 missed calls from the hospital legal team. She set it on the kitchen table and stared at it like it was a live ordnance. Rain was hammering the windows like applause for a performance nobody was supposed to give. At 14:30, Marcus came home early from school. He found his mother sitting at the kitchen table with cold coffee, her nurse's scrub still wet from the morning, her hands still smelling like betadine and antiseptic. He set his backpack down slowly, the way kids do when they've learned to read a room that's changed its pressure. "Why aren't you at work?" he asked. Ashley looked at her son and had no answer she could give him. Because the truth was locked behind classified briefings and security clearances. Because the mission came first. Because sometimes protecting people meant letting them think you'd failed. She was still searching for something to say when the sound came from outside. Not a siren. Not an ambulance. The unmistakable rhythm of a helicopter rotor wash, growing closer, shaking the rain sideways past the kitchen window. Marcus turned to look at the window. "Mom, is that?" "Don't ask," Ashley said quietly. The door to the ER slammed open Thursday evening at 18:47 hours, and the man stumbling through it was bleeding from a circular saw wound along his left forearm. "Construction accident," the paramedics shouted. 2 weeks in Portland, nobody knew him, nobody cared. Ashley was finishing her shift, 42 minutes remaining on a 12-hour rotation, when the trauma team wheeled him past Bay 3. She glanced up from her charting. Just another casualty. Just another Thursday in the ER. Then the man's eyes found her face. His entire body went rigid. The stretcher stopped moving. For 3 full seconds, nobody breathed, and then he began to shout in a dialect she hadn't heard outside of Ramadi. "Zaka! Zaka!" His voice cracked like he'd swallowed broken glass. "Zaka, no, no, you're supposed to be." 2 nurses held him down while he thrashed, and Ashley kept her expression perfectly neutral. Flat. Professional. She did not react. She did not acknowledge. She turned back to her computer and continued typing the medication note she'd been writing 3 seconds before. But that wasn't the worst part. The veteran security guard, Mike Torres, had been standing near the medication cabinet when the man started screaming. Mike had served in Anbar province in 2007, 3 deployments, knew Ramadi the way some people know their own living rooms. He'd heard that dialect before. He'd heard that code name whispered across radio frequencies during the worst fights. Zarka, the ghost female operator who extracted the 3 captured SEALs in 2019, the one who went dark for 7 years before anyone knew she was still alive. Mike stepped forward quietly. He approached Ashley at the medication cabinet where she was standing motionless, and he said 6 words that changed the temperature in the room. Master Chief Petty Officer. His voice was steady. Respectful. Certain. Then he walked away without waiting for a response, and Ashley closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds before returning to her work. The patient in Bay 3 was admitted. Security was called. By 2100 hours, St. Michael's Hospital administration had received a phone call that made the external review team's investigation pivot entirely in a direction nobody expected. A 2-star admiral from Naval Intelligence arrived at the hospital at 0340 Friday morning. The OR was closed. The ER was locked. 27 people gathered in the hospital conference room while this admiral, whose name would never appear in any public record, opened a classified file that had been sealed for 18 months. He read it aloud to Whitfield's investigative team. Master Chief Petty Officer Ashley Ann Cooper. United States Navy, Naval Special Warfare Command. 7 combat deployments. 3 silver stars. He paused between each medal like he was naming the dead. 2 Purple Hearts. Advanced Cardiac Life Support Master Instructor, certified through the Navy Medicine Bureau. Tactical Combat Casualty Care Master Instructor, certified through the Committee on Tactical Combat Casualty Care. Advanced Trauma Life Support Certification current as of 3 weeks ago. Pre-Hospital Trauma Life Support Master Instructor, 17 years current. Field Surgery Experience, 847 procedures. Estimated lives saved in the field, 1,247. The Admiral closed the file and looked directly at Whitfield's representatives. She was placed at St. Michael's on classified assignment 18 months ago to protect Commander James Hayes from a foreign intelligence infiltration threat. That threat materialized this week. That threat is now in custody. Master Chief Cooper's actions prevented a national security compromise. The room went dead silent. Commander Hayes, now awake in his hospital bed with stable monitors and color returning to his face, had been brought to the conference room in a wheelchair. When they asked him if he wanted to speak, he nodded once. His voice came out steady as a rifle shot. 8 years ago in Ramadi, my Humvee hit an IED. Shrapnel everywhere. I couldn't move. Couldn't feel my legs. Master Chief Cooper pulled me from burning rubble while rounds were coming from 2 directions. She carried me for miles to the FOB, for miles through crossfire with 40 kilos of dead weight. I've been told I would have been left behind if anyone else had been there. He looked at the Admiral. She did that twice, sir. Once in Ramadi. Once here. Both times knowing the cost. The investigators exchanged glances. The external review team, which had been authorized by Whitfield to investigate Ashley's pericardiocentesis procedure, had done their job so thoroughly that they'd stumbled into something far darker. They pulled every patient chart Whitfield had touched in the past for years. What they found was methodical, consistent, and criminal. 17 cases. 17 altered medical records. Medication dosages changed after the fact, adverse events buried, mistakes erased and rewritten to hide his incompetence. A surgical resident named Dr. Chen noticed the pattern first, a dosage on a cardiac medication that didn't match the pharmacy upload timestamp. One wrong entry. But when they dug deeper, they found 17 more. Each one traced back to Whitfield's login credentials. Each one a lie. By Monday morning, the Oregon Medical Board had suspended his medical license pending criminal review. By that same afternoon, St. Michael's had terminated his employment and referred the case to the Multnomah County District Attorney. The case moved fast because the chart alterations included a Navy SEAL commander's medications, federal jurisdiction. By Wednesday, federal investigators were examining whether Whitfield had been compromised by the same foreign intelligence network that had paid his nephew to infiltrate patient rooms, or whether he'd simply been dangerously, catastrophically incompetent. The ward clerk whose credentials were used to access Commander Hayes's room at 0342, the breach that had terrified naval intelligence, was Whitfield's nephew, Marcus, hired through his uncle's influence, caught on security footage entering patient rooms with explicit authorization from Whitfield himself. Whitfield had been protecting his nephew from suspicion, shielding him from notice, which meant he'd been providing cover for a foreign intelligence operation without even knowing it. The nephew was now in federal custody. Whitfield's protective instinct to shield his family had created the exact security vulnerability that nearly killed a Navy SEAL commander. Last anyone heard, Dr. Whitfield was teaching CPR certification classes at Portland Community College for $18 an hour. Ashley Cooper stood at Commander Hayes's bedside on Sunday evening, exactly 5 hours after the Admiral's revelation. The monitors hummed their steady rhythm, sinus, stable, alive. Hayes was sitting up now, color back in his face, the terrifying gray pallor replaced by something like warmth. She didn't say anything. She simply reached into her scrub pocket, pulled out the tarnished military challenge coin, the one Hayes had given her in remedy after she'd carried him home alive, and placed it on his bedside tray table. The metal caught the fluorescent light, smooth from 18 years of being turned over and over in hands that had held it through every mission since. Hayes stared at it for a moment. Then, quietly, "You kept it." "I kept it," she said. The door opened. Marcus walked in wearing his JROTC uniform, navy blue with brass that reflected the overhead lights like polished steel. He was 17 now, tall enough to look his mother in the eye, old enough to understand the weight of the silence she'd carried. He looked at his mother, then at Commander Hayes, then at the challenge coin sitting on the tray table, and Ashley watched understanding click into place across his face like a lock turning. "This is why you couldn't tell me," Marcus said slowly. "Why you came home early that night. Why you were sitting at the kitchen table." He swallowed. "Why you were crying." Ashley nodded once. Her jaw was steady. Her hands were steady. The composure that had carried her through 18 years and 847 field procedures didn't crack. It never cracked. "This is why I taught you that real strength means protecting others in silence," she said. Hayes extended his hand to Marcus, palm up, the grip of one warrior to the next generation. "Your mother saved my life twice, son. Once in Ramadi. Once here in this hospital. Both times she did it knowing the cost. Both times she did it anyway." The hospital administrator appeared in the doorway with reinstatement paperwork and a formal apology printed on official letterhead. The nursing supervisor was behind her, crying silently. Ashley signed the papers without reading them, accepted the apology with the same stoic expression she'd worn through every humiliation, every threat, every moment of standing in a hospital hallway while a man with institutional power tried to break her. One signature. That was all it took to close that chapter. She returned to work the next morning. Night shift. 1900 to 0700. Exactly as before. 6 weeks later, Commander Hayes was returned to active duty by Naval Special Warfare Command. His next deployment was classified. 2 weeks after that, Marcus submitted his application to the Naval Academy with a letter of recommendation written by a 2-star admiral. The letter mentioned nothing of Ashley's military service, nothing that would compromise her cover, but it said enough about his character development and leadership potential that the Academy accepted him for the fall class. Ashley Cooper continued working nights at St. Michael's, checking vitals, monitoring medication schedules, keeping her head down, because naval intelligence had another assignment already lined up. Someone had infiltrated a federal holding facility in Seattle. Someone needed to work the hospital ward adjacent to the interrogation block. Someone needed to be ready when the call came. On her last shift before the new assignment began, Ashley found a note in her locker. The handwriting was Mike Torres's, the veteran security guard who'd recognized what everyone else had missed. True heroism is what you do when the world stops watching. Semper Fi, Master Chief. She tucked the note into her pocket next to the challenge coin and headed out for morning rounds, hand steady, expression calm, every bit the quiet nurse nobody notices, exactly the way she needed to be. The way she'd always been. The way she'd always have to be. Some warriors carried guns. Some carried stethoscopes. And the best ones, the ones who'd learned the cost of being truly seen, they carried their battles in silence where nobody could follow, where the price of their strength remained exactly what it had always been, invisible. If you're enjoying the story so far, hit that like button. And I'd love to know, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from.